213 is Nan Madol. This is in Pohnpei, Micronesia. And the rulers at the time were the Sotalir dynasty, 700 to 1600 Common Era, and your materials are basalt boulders and prismatic columns. All right, so what it's showing is we're overall seeing ancient ruins from an abandoned city. This is showing a stratified city, stratified people, and shows an engineering marvel. So we're going to talk about how it's showing stratification and what is the engineering marvel that we're seeing here. A little bit of history for the rulers in the dynasty. They ruled Pohnpei for about 5 centuries. It's descendants from 2 brothers. And then the city was abandoned with no written records. And by written records, there's also no artistic carvings. So here's examples. These would be considered records because they're artistic carvings from Shavindi Huantar. They don't have any of that from Nan Madol. All right, so it had multiple functions. It was a ceremonial, priests would have lived here. It was political and residential site for the rulers. Overall, this functions as their capital city complex. So even though there's the whole island of Pohnpei, these are little tiny islets that are man-made that were built off of this island that function as their capital city. This was described as luxurious palaces where there were obedient servants. And then the local chiefs from the island, from Pohnpei, were forced to move here so that the rulers of the Sotalir dynasty could watch over them. And then there's evidence to show that they worshipped the sea. And some of the evidence is a pool where they had sacred eels. All right, it being an engineering marvel, there are unresolved mysteries about the construction. You can definitely relate that back to Stonehenge, right? How did they get these stones here? What was the function? We know more about the function of Nan Madol based on assumptions. So no concrete was used in the construction. You can relate that to Zimbabwe and to the city of Cusco. Those both used ashlar masonry and just fitting stones together. What they did in Nan Madol is they used crisscrossing patterns of horizontal structures on top of perpendicular basalt logs called headers. So you can see that pattern in these pictures. And then they used coral to fill in the spaces to make it level to stand on. They also built seawalls to protect the structures from storm surges, which is why a lot of these structures are still here today. And then they got these stones, they carved them from volcanic plugs, which I had to look up what that was, and it's a type of cooled lava. And just like Stonehenge, these materials were transported from a great distance. So I read in Khan Academy, it said they came from the other side of the island. They did not have large animals. They didn't have pulleys and they didn't have levers. So how did they carry these heavy materials over 25 miles across this island? And this is a great picture where you can see this is all built on a submerged coral reef. So you can kind of see where the water gets lighter here. This is coral reef. And then they built these islets, these tiny islands onto that surface. All right, the word Nan Madol translates to spaces within. So the spaces within refer to the canals that go through the islands or the islets. Some of these islets had facilities for sacred eels, housing sacred eels, building canoes, preparing coconut oil, and then the largest one was a royal mortuary compound. And there again, look what it looked like from an aerial perspective. All right, for example, there are oral histories, because there's nothing written, right, that describe a series of canals cut to allow eels to enter the city from the sea. A well on the island of Ided, right here, is said to have housed a sacred eel who embodied a sea deity and to whom the innards of specially raised and cooked turtles were fed by priests. Traces of the canal system, as well as a large mound of turtle remains on Ened, are among the archaeological evidence to support these histories. So even though there's no written evidence, this is where we get some of the assumptions about part of the function. All right, overall, how does Nan Madol communicate power and authority? Lots of architecture and complexes and structures communicate power and authority. So how are we seeing this here? with the heavy materials, right? And that would have required a lot of labor, would have required rulers demanding that this is being done. So huge amounts of labor implies an iron-fisted control of the population. And this being built on submerged coral reef, right? They're separating themselves from the islands. This is showing a stratification of society, separating themselves from everybody else. Done.